Welcome to our episode, friends. Today we're going to be discussing the lovely Francesca Albanese's report titled Anatomy of a Genocide. Taha, can you tell us a little about who Francesca Albanese is?
Yeah, absolutely. So Francesca Albanese is basically the United Nations.
Albanese.
Sorry.
I love saying your name. Sorry.
I know, her name is very beautiful. It is not a pasta dish, but it is very beautiful.
Bolognese. No, that's going to get me canceled.
Yeah, it will. So Francesca Albanese is a United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Occupied Palestinian Territories. And I think for anybody that doesn't know, she garnered a lot of attention recently, like in March of this year, in 2024, because she released the report that you mentioned, which is called The Anatomy of a Genocide. And because of the genocide going on in Gaza and how controversial that topic has become, even though it shouldn't be, because it is literally a genocide, right? I think it's interesting because now she is being slandered and smeared, even by, unfortunately, the Canadian government and their High Commission in Geneva.
Boo.
Boo, indeed. So, you went to see Francesca Albanese when she was in Toronto last week.
I did.
I also saw her. Do you want to maybe tell or speak a little bit about what the event was where you went to see her and what were the vibes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was at an event that was hosted by the United Steelworkers, the labor union, as well as Labor for Palestine. They had a joint event going on at the Steelworkers Hall, and it was really great. There was a packed room. You know, I remember walking in, and they had to get more chairs. There was a very clear need and a very clear appetite for people that were ready to not only hear what she has to say, but who really look to her guidance in order to ask, how can we better organize? Can we more deeply organize? And how can we connect our movements to each other as trade unionists that already know what it's like to stand up to a big boss or to a larger power.
A bully.
Yeah, exactly. A bully, a power that is larger than us, right? And so that was a really cool place to be in for me because I felt like I was in a room of experts.
You were home.
Pardon?
You were home.
I was home. It's true. There were 100 of me in there, and it was great. And I think it was really cool because whether someone is just a member of a union, a non-unionized worker, a supporter of the labor movement, a teacher an academic that might be specializing in such areas, or if they're just, for example, like a transit worker.
Anyone.
That
really.
also, anyone that cares about Palestine. So it was a really cool room to be in. I think I really appreciated getting the opportunity to be there, especially because there were so many unique perspectives from different organizers and advocates who had done this before. And so, for example, there was a man there who was from Zambia, and he spoke up, he asked a question, and he sort of referred to the South African apartheid in the 90s and living in Zambia at the time and housing what is it? The African Congress headquarters?
Yeah.
Okay. And housing the African Congress headquarters in Zambia, which was then attacked and bombed.
By South Africa.
Yes, by South Africa. Later in the apartheid, and he sort of spoke to the solidarity that represents, right? And the allyship of neighboring countries, of countries that are, experiencing colonialism together or whatever form of oppression it might be that pertains to a certain group of countries.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think something that you touch upon, and I would love for you to expand a little bit more upon that, is the Palestine being a labor issue. And I think a lot of people don't understand that, but I think we've seen that as people who are community organizers, people who are researchers, that over the last year, the anti-Palestinian groups have really taken it upon themselves to smear people like Fred Hahn, right? And for anybody that doesn't know who Fred Hahn is, we'll do a quick intro. Basically, president of CUPE Ontario. CUPE is like one of the biggest.
It's the biggest
It is
Canadian,
the biggest Canadian
union. Yeah.
union. And I just think like,
And he's an executive of CUPE National.
and he's an executive of CUPE National, and he's a president of CUPE Ontario.
Yes.
And the way that he was being forced by CUPE's like national to resign,
Yeah, by
because
the
he
executive
said,
board, yeah.
don't
Bomb
blow
kids.
children up. Yeah, no, literally. And I think
That's
like,
such a controversial opinion, Taha. I can't believe you would ever
I
say
know.
that.
I thought we all determined that children were innocent and important, but apparently, if you're president of a union and you say it, it's a problem. And I think that's what you were alluding to. Like, Palestine is a labor issue, and there are people from so many different like labor unions there. I know you've done a lot of organizing in Toronto, and like, what you think is the value for unions to continue putting pressure on their leadership, on like dock workers, for instance, right? And like how Spain recently their government decided they were not going to let any ships that are going to Israel with weapons dock at their ports.
Yeah.
So because sometimes, when people say, oh, things are never going to change. And I wonder, I'm like, actually, like things you do at a smaller level that affect your life and around you can actually be really impactful.
Yeah, Taha, I think those are such great points. I think, first and foremost, there is so much power amongst workers. There is so much power in
Retweet.
working class movements.
Sorry, re-X. Okay, never mind. Sorry.
Retweet.
Not the Musk.
We
It's
don't
too
claim
Musky.
Musk.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You know what?
No, that's my off.
Let's start over. Just kidding. Continue.
Yeah.
So much power with the workers.
There's so much power in working class movements. I would argue that, of all of the issues that I've worked on, all the issues that I've done, advocacy work, campaigns, policy, research, whatever it is, everything comes back to class. And so I think when I finally got a taste of union organizing and working in the labor movement, I think it really brought the whole picture full circle to me.
Wow.
I think that everyday people are going to be what changes the world. Everyday people are going to be the ones that change the world. Everyday people are going to be the ones who take on, tasks that are integral to our movements, such as talking to your neighbors, talking to your coworkers, talking to your children, and, the people that uphold, who prop up our societies, right? Our teachers, our academics, our doctors, our nurses, our transit workers, our engineers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Oh my God, there's a hair here.
And it's really interesting that you say that because I think once I moved to North America, I remember people saying, oh, don't talk about politics at a party.
Yeah, right.
Don't talk, which I mean, I get it. Like sometimes you just want to have fun and
don't.
joy. But you know what
You
I
don't
mean.
think politics is fun?
Politics is joyous, guys. Full of joy.
There's so much happiness that I find in knowing exactly how Kamala Harris lost her campaign.
Well,
So much joy.
that needs to be a whole other episode.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
Well, yeah, that is weaponizing identity.
But I think that just going to your point, you're saying people and their power and talking to your neighbors, talking to your coworkers. And I think there's just such a systemic, societal, cultural issue where we're like dissuading and discouraging people from discussing politics. Fine, you don't want to talk about it at, one party, two party, three party. But then it's just like...
Not even the fifth?
Not even the fifth, literally. The Fifth Amendment. Okay.
Exactly. Thank you for getting it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's a reason why we have a podcast together. But yeah, no, I think that
Because we're twins.
the only reason I'm like mentioning this point is because I think like you've brought up such an important topic and point that we need to maybe like remarkably change the way we view how we learn things and what is considered decorum and what isn't, and why a lot of these social cultural things are actually keeping us subdued to the systems in power.
Absolutely. I think when it comes to...
Bless you.
when it comes to union organizing, the three things that we talk about a lot is educate, agitate, mobilize. Those are the three pillars that we refer to a lot in the labor movement. And and also when it comes to community organizing, period, and creating grassroots movements, it's important that we make actions easy, accessible, and everywhere. So
Yep.
I don't know if you can tell, but socialists love the rule of threes. And
I know where this is going.
stop.
Socialist.
I stop. And I think when it comes to, we need to educate people. People need to know what it is that impacts their life, what the powers at play are, how things connect to them. And then we need to agitate them. We need to say, hey, don't you think that you should be doing something about this? Yeah. Don't you think someone should be doing something about this? Do you think anyone is doing anything about it? And if not, then we mobilize. Absolutely. Educate, agitate, mobilize. Yes. No. Oh, easy. Oh, easy. Okay. I'm remembering my threes.
That's okay.
And then we need to make sure that we're acting on these things, right? We need to. You've said this before, Taha, and it rings clear in my head every single day. But the left is really bad at complaining. The right loves to complain.
Please complain.
The left likes to complain internally, sure, but when do we take those complaints and move that up? When do we take those complaints and, send an email? When do we take those complaints and start a petition? When do we take those complaints and start a union, right? We need to be able to do these things. We need to mobilize on them, and we actually do need to do them every day. And so that brings me to the principles that we talk about in grassroots organizing, making actions easy, accessible, and everywhere. Yep. We need to make something easy so that people can fit it into their everyday. You can't carve out 3 hours to go to a rally and back. Well, can you take 3 minutes or less to sign a petition? That's easy for a lot of people. Maybe that's not accessible for you. Maybe
for whatever reason, right? Yeah, I know, for a lot of people, it's, I think going back to the complaining point really quickly, and bringing it back to Francesca Albanese, so when I saw her, so it was like an Islamic Relief Canada event, which was a fundraiser, right? And it was very moving. There were a lot of speakers before her. Well, not a lot, but 3 or 4 speakers before her who had incredibly powerful testimony, especially the doctor that went to Gaza to work. Right. And there was not a single dry eye in the room. We were crying so much. Sure. And what Francesca Albanese said when she took the stage is that, she said, guys, there is no, what do you call it? There is no doubt. There is no question that what's happening in Gaza is a genocide. And she said to the lawyers in Canada, where are you? Where are you? We have a justice system in Canada. Yeah, and why isn't it being upheld? Absolutely. And she said, no, for sure. And she said that, the fact that Canadian institutions are in violation of Canadian law by not only just staying silent about the genocide, which, by the way, is an issue because when you're a United Nations member state, it is your responsibility to speak up against a genocide. Yes. And also, she says that, why is it that so many people are not understanding that their professions, whether you're an academic, you're a president of a universities, multiple, all over Canada. Literally. Or if you're a lawyer, if you're an academic, you're a professor, it doesn't educate. It does not matter what you're doing. She said we need to center what's happening in Gaza in these conversations. And what makes me, I think one of the saddest moments, and there's been many sad moments in the last year, was when there was an event where a professor, we're gonna link his name in the caption because I'm so sorry, I'm forgetting it right now. But professor who is from Gaza, currently visiting scholar lecturer at York University, got here in July, and he said that please, no matter what research you're doing, please don't forget us.
Yeah.
And that for me was like, the people in Gaza are asking for so little.
So little.
Like, they're
The
just saying,
memory,
there's like,
a fragment of a memory.
they're like, don't forget us. Like, if you're doing research in anthropology,
Yeah.
don't forget us. If you're doing
Yeah.
research in biodiversity,
Yeah.
don't forget us. I mean, let's
Yeah.
talk about that, you know?
Absolutely.
And I think that brings me back to your point, is
Yeah.
like, there's so much power
There's so
with
much
the
power.
workers,
Absolutely.
with people who are, no matter what you're doing, even if your research is in sustainable energy.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that like power stations, sanitation systems in Gaza have been decimated by Israeli
Absolutely.
attacks
Absolutely.
is something that you can even just write a one pager on it. You can do so much. You can amplify the voices of Palestinian academics, Palestinian organizers.
Absolutely.
And it just goes back to that, what Francesca Albanese said, like, mobilize and do what you can. And people sometimes think it needs to be a grand gesture,
Right.
changing this, that. But it's
Right.
like, you can actually just, as the professor said, don't forget us.
Absolutely. I think and that's the piece that is really important when it comes to grassroots movements, that, you know, these easy accessible tasks, they are everywhere.
Yeah.
Even if we don't spread them everywhere intentionally, they are everywhere. They exist, like, these organizing exists in so many different capacities.
Yeah.
This is a part of organizing. You and I writing an article is a part of organizing. Signing a petition is part of organizing. Educating young people is a part of organizing. And that's
Absolutely.
and that's something that Francesca Albanese spoke to a lot at the talk that I was at. You know, there were a handful of teachers that were in the audience, and they had stood up, they had asked, you know, how do I talk about Palestine with my students? And also, as a high school teacher, how do I talk about Palestine with my students and encourage them to do so as well, and encourage them to act when the institutions that they are applying for, that they are hoping to get into in order to provide them opportunities to get a leg up in society, and in order to be able to, you know, actually pull themselves up from the bootstraps and like work hard and collect power. You know, a lot of these institutions are still like Zionist, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, a lot of these institutions are governed by major Zionists, right? You know, they're people who fund CIJA, they're people who, you know...
Extremely...
yeah.
I know it's controversial to say, and you want to cancel us, but the amount of Zionist organizations in Toronto that have straight up racist leadership. Forget, like, obviously nobody cares about Muslims, as we have experienced. Nobody cares
Said
about...
as two Muslims.
No, literally.
That was sarcastic.
But also, you know, it's the amount of racism that exists, the fact that Meyer Weinstein, I mean, I really don't want to say his name, but I'm saying it. Please.
An individual.
And Ron Banerjee, like, you know, Jasmine Zine, who's a professor in Canada, she wrote a great book called The Canadian Islamophobia Industry, and she talks about how Ron Banerjee and Meyer Weinstein, like, got a bunch of very extreme Zionists and Hindu nationalists to endorse Faith Goldie as the mayoral candidate. And if anybody that is not from Toronto, it's completely fine. If you don't know who Faith Goldie is, just Google her. That woman was so right-wing, nationalist.
She's so vile.
Yeah. And I'm just confused. I'm like, why would you, if you're complaining and you are saying and you are arguing that this is for the safety of Jewish people, why are you platforming and endorsing a candidate like Faith Goldie?
Absolutely.
Who's a white nationalist?
Absolutely.
Like, I'm sorry. Do you think that they're not going to be upset with the Jewish population after they're done with Muslims?
Absolutely.
And I think that's the thing, is like, we need to, this really big missed opportunity of building bridges, which I mean is happening through Jewish Voice for Peace, through independent Jewish Voices, Jews Against Genocide. And I think that work is being done by our wonderful Jewish siblings, but it's one of those things, you know, when you bring that up, people are like, oh, so
that's a fringe group or whatever.
And you're telling us what a good Jew and a bad Jew is. I'm like, no, actually, that's not what's happening.
No.
What's happening is that we're saying, please stop platforming voices that are not only Islamophobic or anti-Palestinian, because there's a difference. There's a huge difference because anti-Palestinian racism, as Francesca Albanese says, is literally racism and discrimination against somebody just because they say they're Palestinian.
Yeah.
And we see this a lot in discourse on...
we see this everywhere now.
I mean, not only in right-wing media, but even on like so-called liberal media, where a Zionist representative or a government of Israel representative will say like, well, like, where is Palestine on a map? And it's like, really, isn't Quebec a nation? I don't see Quebec as a country. Let's really get controversial here. But if you ask people in Quebec, Quebec is a nation.
Right.
Because the way that we have decided we're going to assign value and dignity to people's life and their so-called nations is so racist in itself that we're so dismissive of Palestinian
it brings us back to that idea of white supremacy and just how ingrained it is into our societies, and also how normalized it's become. It's important to recognize that these institutions inherently uphold white supremacy. They prop up white supremacy and white supremacist values.
Yep.
I know. Yeah.
And I think also, just really quickly, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I just want to say...
I know, I didn't even finish my 3.
I know. But I just
we just have so much to say.
Yeah, I just want to say one quick thing.
Yeah.
People are going to say, oh, why are you saying Zionist organizations are upholding white supremacy? Because some of them are not white, the members, right?
Sure.
Let me make it very clear. Rishi Sunak is not white, but he upheld white supremacy and continues to do so. Vivek Ramaswamy, Nikki Haley, Tulsi Gabbard,
Kamala
Harris. There are many people who are not white, but they can still uphold white supremacist structures and ideals.
Absolutely.
Just how there are women that uphold misogyny.
Absolutely.
There are queer people that uphold queerphobia.
Yeah.
And there are Muslim people that uphold Islamophobia.
Yeah,
so I just want to, sorry to interrupt you, but go ahead. I just wanted to make this clear because I know that there's that sort of rebuttal that's thrown our way, and I'm just like, listen.
We have an episode on weaponizing identity coming out, friends. Just wait for episode 3.
Yep.
We have a lot to say there. I do want to come back to the piece about education and being an educator and talking about Palestine. I think it's so important that we recognize that anti-Palestinian racism and solidarity both look like small actions on a day-to-day basis. That can look like, when it came to South African apartheid, I was shown Hotel Rwanda at the age of 15 in my 10th grade class, and I understood exactly what apartheid was. We talked about it. We learned why it was bad. We learned what it looked like policy-wise. We learned how it was upheld. We learned the different sides that were, the different
kids
sides
are not
that were,
stupid.
Exactly. Kids are not stupid. And that's so important to remember. And that's so important to remember when it comes to educating them, right? When it comes to educating anyone, really. Like, the idea of a Palestinian person having value just like anyone else is what we need to teach people. A Palestinian person having the right to self-defense, the right to, their own autonomy, their bodily autonomy. These are the things that we have to teach people. It's not, it's important to center the voices that are at the middle of this genocide, that are at the center of this genocide, like you said, and to remember what is and isn't important about that and how we are prioritizing them and how we are platforming them. I think when it comes to being an educator and equipping your students in order to be able to, go to post-secondary education, to, attach their name to an institution that is supposed to provide them opportunities, it's important that we equip these young people, we equip these students to be able to choose how they are going to receive and use the education that they receive, right? U of T, the University of Toronto has... the University of Toronto has an undergrad major called Peace, Justice, and Equity Studies. And I don't know about you, but I was around the U of T encampment, and there were so many, there were, I need a better way to say this sentence, and I feel like you'll come up with one. There were so many students that belonged to this major that were then getting kicked out of the encampment, that were given trespassing notices, that were policed heavily, had a huge police presence cast onto them. You know, so it's like, we need to be able to equip our students to be able to take these actions and to continue to resist against these institutions that say, oh, peace and justice, but not when you're criticizing us, right?
Yeah. No, I think that is so. You actually said it really well, because how are you going to teach these kids about peace, justice, equity,
Diplomacy?
and then not expect them to actually put that theory into praxis.
Absolutely. Who are you accountable to, right?
No,
That's what
really.
it comes down
Yeah.
to every day. And we talk a lot about this at our favorite socialist org, Spring. A lot of what we talk about in our collective is, who are we accountable to, right? That's the thing, that's the idea that's going to keep you grounded in your politics, that's going to keep you grounded in your advocacy and in these power games that capitalism has necessitated that we play.
Yeah.
You know, who are you accountable to? What are you accountable to? How are you going to do that? And how are you doing that? What is it that needs to be changed, etc.? And I think it's really important to remember that each and every one of us has the power to shape the world around us. You know, I may not be Elon Musk or Grimes or Donald Trump.
I'm so happy that you're not Elon Musk
Oh my
or
God.
Trump.
I'm happy you're not Elon Musk. But I think a great reminder of that was when Fred Hahn was under attack by the QP National Executive Board again and was called on to resign. You know, Spring, we launched a petition.
The socialist organization.
Yes,
Spring.
the socialist organization.
We are not being paid by Spring, I promise you.
No,
Yeah.
We pay our own dues. We pay Spring to do advocacy with Spring. Anyways, and that's on co-ops. But, I think a really pivotal moment that really inspired me and reminded me of the value and the
Power,
weight that we hold as individuals and the power that we have as a collective was when, you know, Spring Socialist Network, we launched a email tool, so defending Fred Hahn to the National Executive Board of CUPE, and within, I don't know, what was it, a weekend?
Like a week or so?
Literally a week.
Even faster.
A weekend,
maybe,
yeah, might be faster. We will cite that here.
It doesn't matter.
We collected over 200,000 signatures in support of Fred Hahn.
Just within a few days.
Exactly. 200, and within 24 hours, it was at 100,000 signatures. And so over the course of a few more days, we were able to get 200,000 people to speak up, backing Fred Hahn, saying, no, QP National Executive Board, Fred Hahn is representing me, Fred Hahn is representing my voice, and Fred Hahn is advocating for what it is that I believe in. And that's what you need to see clearly here, that the people have spoken.
I think that is such a powerful example. And it's stuff like that that really reinforces my belief that there are systems in place that don't want us to succeed as workers, as activists, as organizers, as anti-war support, like people that are anti-war.
Yeah.
Apparently
People
that is so controversial now.
So controversial.
I feel like it's always been controversial to be anti-war in the moment when the war is being waged against innocent people. And then like 10 years, 20 years from now, we'll have an post-Iraq war sort of realization like, wow, how could we? Actually, how could we is because it's the same people now in the media and in positions of power that are, again, manufacturing consent.
Absolutely.
Shout out to Noam Chomsky. But coming back to Francesca Albanese and her report,
Icon. Aries Queen.
I love that. I think that, you know, one of the things that she mentions in her report is and also, by the way, we'll try to link it to our link tree, but you all, if you just Google the anatomy of a genocide, Francesca Albanese, or just the anatomy of a genocide, you can actually read the report.
Yeah,
it's not that long. It's under 30 pages, and it's one of those.
This is said by a grad student.
It's
Mind
said
you,
by grad
grad
student. I
student.
know. If you want.
I mean,
Maybe
that's a short book. It's a short book.
But
It's
also,
a report. That's a regular size report.
It's a regular size report. So she, first of all, defines. Well, actually, correction, she doesn't define. She mentions what the United Nations and the Genocide Convention
Right.
views as genocide.
Right.
And there's many different points in there. And one of the things is that she talks about how genocide is basically any act that is committed to destroy and eliminate or harm in part or fully a group of people, right? They could be a racial group, national group, ethnic group, religious group.
And of any, terrible ruler in recent history, Benjamin Netanyahu has had such aggressively clear intent of doing so as well.
I would highly recommend our audience, because we can't get into everything right now, because we would literally be here for years.
Forever.
But what I would say is that people can just look up his statements, his speeches on YouTube from, I would say, way back in the day.
Like 13 years ago.
13 years ago, from the 90s.
Yeah.
This man has always been against a Palestinian state. He has always been against self-determination and dignity for Palestinians.
Yes,
but coming back to it really quickly. Sorry, do you want to say something?
No, I just wanted to mention Greater Israel, but you can... and he's made it very clear that his intention is not only to exterminate Palestinians, but to create a greater Israel, a greater Israeli state that also encompasses Syria and I want to say parts of Egypt.
Parts of Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and even some parts extending up to Saudi Arabia and Iraq.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about a prime minister that believes in that idea, and then we're told we're crazy, that Palestinians don't want to accept peace, it's so disingenuous.
That this is not colonial.
Yeah, and I do want to say, back to the definition.
Yes.
She talks about how the definition of a genocide is an intent to basically destroy in part or fully a group, which could be a national, religious, ethnic group. And she also mentions how the Genocide Convention lays out different acts. And guys, if you just go and read the Genocide Convention's definition of a genocide, and you see how it mentions if you are stopping people from a certain group from giving birth, that's also is part of genocide.
Absolutely,
and look
that's
at
so
how
cruel.
many kids have died in incubators in Gaza, how many Palestinian mothers have had to suffer brutal pain by giving birth without anesthetic, and how so many women and children have died through that.
Absolutely.
And how when the first report was released with the names of the martyrs in Palestine, people say, how are you calling martyrs? These people are terrorists. Really? The first, how many pages were just people that were infants?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, nope, I'm not going to include that.
And I also think that in addition to that, they mentioned that deliberate moving of people from one...
Can I include one stat?
Of course you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
I read somewhere, Taha, and I think it was a Palestinian youth movement post where they recapped at the 400-day mark, there were over 200, and these were just the identified, there were over 209 infants that were born and killed in the last year of this genocide.
And that number is probably...
And that's just who we found.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's likely higher.
And I think there's so many different points in there. One of them is mental and physical pain that you're inflicting, humiliation, degradation, moving children from one area to another. Basically everything that's in the definition of a genocide by the Genocide Convention, which after... the Holocaust, we decided that this should never happen again.
Yeah.
And we're literally seeing it happen.
Absolutely.
And it is so
by the state that was created from the Genocide Conventions.
Yeah. And I think that now we even see the Lemkin Institute. And Lemkin is basically the man who was a Jewish scholar and man who basically talks about the definition of genocide. And when Antony Blinken recently posted about Veterans Day, the Lemkin Institute basically tweeted back at him and said, "We can't wait for you to be out of office and held accountable for your war crimes." But we are told that calling it a genocide is anti-Semitic, when I think it is so disgusting to defend a genocide by saying that it's anti-Semitic. You know what I mean? That is anti-Semitic, actually, to say that you shouldn't call a genocide a genocide.
Yeah, and then using Jewish people's name, dragging it through the mud.
And their beliefs, their values, and basically weaponizing that against people that are asking for a genocide to stop.
Absolutely.
And I would say that Francesca Albanese in her report also talks about how the dispossession and displacement and killing and injuring and just I mean, every horrible thing
The
that has happened to
violence,
Palestine.
yeah.
The violence against
Yeah.
Palestinian is not new. 1947 to 1949 is when she finds through her findings it all started. Then she also mentions how since 1967, this has just continued, where mass dispossession of Palestinians has taken place. Palestinian women, as you were saying, Lubaba, were sterilized.
Yeah.
And then since 2005, we're always told Israel actually withdrew from Gaza. Well, actually, let's talk about that, because Israel withdraws from Gaza, but then the entire time since then in this report, Francesca Albanese talks about how the Israeli current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, even back then was against this withdrawal from Gaza,
Right.
and how the entire society has kind of, especially the ruling class in Israel,
And this
has
was
made it-
19 years ago, mind you. This
yeah,
was
and
almost
they
two
had
decades ago.
since 2005 made it very clear that Gaza is actually a territory to be reclaimed. So this like false narrative of, oh, we left Gaza, blah blah
Yeah.
blah. It's like, no, you left Gaza and then you didn't make an honest attempt to actually invest in the success of the leadership there, and now we're in a situation where it has been an open air prison.
Exactly. I was hoping you would say that exact phrase. Thank you. And how cruel is that?
It's
right?
extremely cruel.
To back an entire race of people into a corner and
Just murder them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so horrendous, and one of the things that I found to be so moving is Dr. Salman Khalid, who was speaking at this event, where Francesca Albanese was the fundraiser in Toronto, and he says that, I mean, first of all, this man cried so much, and we all cried with him, because he's talking about being a Canadian doctor, going to Gaza, working there, and he said one day there was a little girl that came in, a SEAL, and she basically had a femur fracture injury, which is one of the most painful injuries you can have.
Yeah.
And he said because of the lack of pain medication, they had to just try to fix all of that without it. And I mean, I can't even imagine, because I've been in the ER in Canada, and the way that when you're finally given something for your pain, whether it's Tylenol or Advil or whatever it is, you instantly feel even just like a mental relief that, okay, I'm getting the care. This kid, they
that
said...
things are going to be okay.
Yeah, and they say that this kid, she's laying there, and she's calling for her mother, and Dr. Salman Khalid says that it is so painful to see a child call for their mother when you know the parent is not alive. And when the doctor was working on the femur, he says that this girl kept on looking at one of the surgeons and says, "Uncle, please be gentle." And we are supposed to sit here and be told if we call a spade and what it is, that it is somehow anti-Semitic?
That it somehow erases Jewish people?
No. And I think this is the thing that we need to always focus on. And in this report, Francesca Albanese talks about a mass movement that the so-called upholders of Western civilization and human rights and world order, what people need to actually be doing, these governments need to be doing, is putting an arms embargo, economic sanctions, trade relations need to be reviewed. And also she talks about academic.
Yes. She was talking
academic
about this.
boycotts.
Yes, she talked about this in my talk as well, and she really emphasized the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, and how all-encompassing it is and how we need to implement it as so.
Absolutely. And I think like something that we hear a lot from university presidents in North America is that, well, we shouldn't have an academic boycott, even though all 12 of Gaza's universities have been decimated, even though students are defending their thesis from tents. I mean,
they're holding on for their education.
They're doing everything they can,
because that's all they have.
We're told by university presidents in Canada, oh, well, some of the most fierce critics of Israel and Israeli critics of Israel are from Israeli universities. Okay, well, if you actually listen to those critics, I can't speak specifically from the Israeli university, but let's talk about people like Gideon Levy, people like Ilan Pape. They always would, they actually support an academic boycott, because when you're bringing people in who are actively working on artificial intelligence and surveillance tools to kill Palestinians, I don't think that they should be offering fellowship to Canadian students to go there.
No.
And of course...
How unfair is that?
It's very unfair. And I think we will definitely have to do a more detailed review of the report. And I think, there's so much work that is being done. All somebody has to do is go online and search up healthcare workers for Palestine,
Absolutely.
labor for Palestine,
Families for
educated
Palestine.
East End for Palestine in Toronto.
Absolutely.
And I think obviously, Lubaba and I, as Lubaba mentioned, we're also working on writing an article for Spring magazine, which we will link as well in the future once it's published.
And we'll expand on these ideas and that so that folks can go down.
And we want to do justice to the report and actually talk about the stats. But, there have been over 450 attacks on healthcare facilities in Gaza since last year.
Ridiculous.
And I just really want people to take this seriously and just do what you can at this point to, call awareness and enact change. Also, I think something that I want to leave our audience with that Lubaba and I were talking about. In the event that I went to, Francesca Albanese says, even though in this country, this controversial country being Canada, to say the word genocide when describing what's happening in Canada, she said it doesn't change the fact that that is what's happening on the ground.
Absolutely.
And we will also mention this in our article, but she talked a lot about also centering Indigenous Canadians.
Yes.
Whose struggle mirrors
Yeah.
what's happening in Palestine, and Palestinian Indigenous people's struggle mirrors what has and continues to happen to Indigenous people here. And we must do what we can to both focus locally and globally and build these bridges of solidarity.
Absolutely, because these struggles are intertwined. And I think that brings me to this really important point that Francesca Albanese mentioned. When it comes to boycott, divestment, and sanctions, when it comes to a state taking action against an oppressive force, when it comes to a state taking action against violence, they have to be able to name it. If they can't name it, they don't see it. And if they don't see it, they don't do anything about it. And so right now, many advocates, including, I want to say, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, the NCCM, and MP Salma Zahid are trying to get anti-Palestinian racism defined by the Canadian state as a form of oppression. And so I think that piece is really important, especially for everyday people to rally around, because once the state can see that, once the state defines that, then they are going to do something about it.
Absolutely.
And that's the key to moving forward, I think, in pushing the Canadian government to really recognize this genocide
take
and
concrete actions,
and follow the ICJ ruling.
And we will keep you guys posted on which petitions and how you can actually send your letters to the Canadian government and MPs to enact this change. Thank you so much, Lubaba.
Thank you so much, Taha.
And we will see you guys soon in another episode.